The saddest part about getting older isn't the wrinkles or the silence. It's realizing the people you once lived for can slowly learn to live without you. I turned 68 on a cold October Thursday. The kind of evening where rain taps softly against the windows, and the whole neighborhood smells like wet leaves and chimney smoke. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking anyway. A small pot roast. Mashed potatoes with too much butter the way Ryan used to love them as a boy. A chocolate cake with vanilla frosting sitting carefully in the center of the dining table beside 6 paper plates I'd bought the week before because Noah liked the ones with blue stars around the edges. By 7:30, the candles had already melted halfway down. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No text from my son. No call. Not even one of those rushed messages people send out of guilt. The house felt too quiet. 32 years ago, birthdays in this home meant noise. My husband Daniel would wake up before sunrise just to make coffee and burn pancakes while pretending he was a professional chef. Ryan would run downstairs with handmade cards full of crooked handwriting and glitter stuck to the glue. Back then, I never imagined a day would come when I'd spend my birthday listening to the refrigerator hum, because there was nobody left speaking in my kitchen. I cut myself a small slice of cake anyway. The frosting tasted sweeter than I remembered. Or maybe loneliness changes the way things taste. At 8:47, headlights flashed across my living room curtains. I froze. For one foolish second, I thought maybe Ryan had finally remembered. Maybe traffic had delayed them. Maybe Melissa had convinced him to stop somewhere for flowers. But when I opened the front door, only Noah stood there beneath the rain, clutching a dented silver tin box against his chest. His little sneakers were soaked through. Water dripped from the sleeves of his red jacket. "Grandma," he said softly, breathing hard like he'd been running. "I came by myself." My stomach tightened instantly. "Noah, sweetheart, where are your parents?" He looked down at the box instead of answering. "Dad forgot again," he whispered. The porch light caught the tears collecting in his eyes. "But Grandpa told Dad to give you this on your birthdays after he died." My heartbeat stumbled. Daniel had been gone for almost 3 years. Slowly, Noah held out the old silver box toward me with both hands. I recognized it immediately. Daniel used to keep it hidden on the top shelf of the garage cabinet where he stored old family photographs and receipts from vacations we could barely afford back then. I stared at it without moving. "Dad said it wasn't important anymore," Noah said quietly. "Mom was gonna throw it away." I stepped aside quickly and pulled Noah into the warmth of the house before the rain could soak him any further. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his blonde hair clung damply to his forehead exactly the way Ryan's used to when he was that age. I knelt beside him and unzipped his jacket while my mind struggled to catch up with what he had just said. Melissa was going to throw the box away. The words sat heavily in my chest. "Does your father know you came here alone?" I asked gently. Noah hesitated before shrugging his small shoulders. "Dad is still at the restaurant with Mom." "Restaurant?" I swallowed slowly. So they had gone out tonight after all. Just not with me. I nodded as though the answer did not hurt. Were they celebrating something special? Noah looked uncomfortable then, twisting the sleeves of his jacket in his hands. "Mom said birthdays for old people are depressing." He said it carefully like he already knew the sentence sounded wrong. I looked away for a moment toward the dining room table. The candles had burned down completely now, thin streams of wax hardened across the white plates. The Blue Star napkin still sat untouched beside the silverware. I suddenly felt embarrassed that I had prepared so much food for people who never planned on coming. "Grandma!" Noah's voice softened. I remembered. That nearly broke me more than everything else combined. I smiled anyway and brushed rainwater gently from his hair. "I know you did, sweetheart." I warmed him a bowl of soup while he sat at the kitchen counter swinging his legs beneath the stool. The old silver box rested between us beneath the yellow overhead light. I had not opened it yet. Part of me was afraid to. Daniel had always been sentimental in quiet ways. He left notes in kitchen drawers and birthday cards hidden under pillows. Even after 40 years together, he still kissed my forehead every morning before work as if leaving without doing it would somehow ruin the day. After he passed, the house lost its rhythm. Ryan stopped visiting as often. Melissa became polite in the coldest possible way. Everything slowly shifted until I no longer felt like the center of my own family. Noah spooned soup carefully into his mouth before glancing toward the silver box again. Grandpa used to look at it a lot, he whispered. One time he told me some things are too important to let people throw away. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Outside, the rain continued falling softly against the windows. The clock above the stove read 9:15. My birthday was almost over. And somehow the only person who had remembered me was the smallest person in the entire family. After Noah finished his soup, I wrapped him in one of Daniel's old flannel blankets and sat beside him on the living room couch. The silver box remained on the coffee table between us, untouched, almost like neither of us wanted to disturb whatever memories still lived inside it. The rain outside had softened into a quiet drizzle now, and every few minutes headlights slid across the ceiling from passing cars on the street. Noah leaned against my shoulder, exhausted from the cold and whatever courage it had taken for an 8-year-old boy to ride his bicycle across town in the dark. "Did your parents know Grandpa wanted me to have this?" I asked carefully. Noah shook his head. "I do not think Mom liked Grandpa talking about old stuff." That sounded exactly like Melissa. She always smiled politely whenever Daniel shared family stories, but I used to notice the impatience hiding behind her eyes. To Melissa, anything sentimental seemed unnecessary, unless it could be posted online or displayed in perfect lighting for her friends to admire. Real memories did not interest her, especially not old ones. Noah reached toward the silver box and traced one finger slowly across the scratched lid. "Grandpa cried one time when he held it." I looked down at him in surprise. Daniel rarely cried. In 40 years together, I had only seen tears in his eyes 3 times. The day Ryan was born, the afternoon we buried his younger brother after a car accident, and the night his doctor quietly explained there was nothing more they could do for his heart. "What did he say?" I whispered. Noah frowned, trying to remember. "He told me people forget important things when somebody dies. He said families stop listening to each other." A heavy silence settled over the room after that. The clock ticked softly above the fireplace. Somewhere upstairs, an old pipe rattled the way it always did when the weather turned cold. I stared at the silver box and suddenly remembered the last birthday Daniel was alive for. Ryan and Melissa had canceled dinner that year too. Melissa claimed Noah had a stomach bug. Daniel pretended not to mind, but later that night I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table staring at his phone. He kept checking for messages that never came. At the time I told myself families get busy. Children grow up. Life changes. But sitting there beside Noah now, I realized something painful. This had not started after Daniel died. It started long before that. We had simply ignored it because pretending hurt less. Noah yawned and rested his head against my arm again. "Grandma," he murmured sleepily, "are you sad?" I looked toward the untouched birthday cake still sitting beneath the dim dining room light. Then I glanced at the silver box waiting quietly on the coffee table like a voice from the past refusing to disappear. "A little," I admitted softly. "But tonight I think I finally understand something I should have understood a long time ago." Noah fell asleep shortly after 10 o'clock with Daniel's old blanket tucked beneath his chin. I carried him carefully to the guest room down the hall, the same room Ryan used to sleep in when thunderstorms scared him as a child. The hallway creaked softly beneath my feet as I walked back toward the living room alone. The silver box still sat exactly where we had left it. Quiet. Waiting. For a long moment I simply stood there staring at it while the rain tapped gently against the windows. Then I finally reached for the lid. Inside were dozens of old photographs bundled neatly with faded blue ribbon. Daniel always saved everything. Ticket stubs from county fairs. Polaroids from camping trips. Birthday cards with crooked handwriting from Ryan's elementary school years. Beneath the photographs sat a small cassette tape labeled in Daniel's careful block letters. "For Evelyn. Birthday." My chest tightened instantly. Underneath the tape was a folded envelope with my name written across the front. I ran my thumb slowly over Daniel's handwriting. Even after all this time, seeing it still felt like hearing his voice unexpectedly in a crowded room. I opened the letter carefully, afraid the paper might tear. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I probably did not get the chance to give this to you myself." I had to stop for a moment because my vision blurred. I sat down slowly in Daniel's old recliner near the fireplace and continued reading beneath the warm yellow lamp beside me. I know you always pretend being forgotten does not hurt you, but it does. And I need you to know I saw it happening long before you admitted it to yourself. My hands trembled slightly against the paper. Outside, the wind brushed softly through the trees lining the street. The entire neighborhood felt asleep except for me, and the ghost sitting quietly in this room. Daniel's letter continued in the same steady tone. He used whenever life became difficult. Ryan loves you. But somewhere along the way, he became too weak to protect the people he loves from the people who control him. I swallowed hard. Daniel had never openly criticized Melissa while he was alive. He believed peace inside a family mattered more than pride. But now I understood something painful. Silence had cost him more than he ever admitted. There was another sentence underlined near the bottom of the page. Please do not spend the rest of your life shrinking yourself just to make other people comfortable. Tears finally slipped down my face then. Quiet. Tears. Exhausted tears. The kind that come when somebody tells you the truth you have spent years trying not to see. I folded the letter carefully and looked back into the box. Beneath the cassette tape rested one final item. A small white envelope with Ryan's name written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. And unlike mine, that envelope had never been opened. I did not open Ryan's envelope that night. It felt wrong somehow, like stepping into a conversation between father and son that had been frozen in time. Instead, I placed it carefully back inside the silver box and sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of birthday candles and rain-soaked fabric. Across the hallway, Noah slept peacefully beneath Daniel's old blanket, completely unaware that he had just carried more honesty into this house than the rest of my family had managed in years. Around midnight, my phone finally buzzed on the side table beside me. I looked down slowly, already knowing who it would be. Ryan. The message was short. Happy birthday, Mom. Sorry today got away from us. We will celebrate this weekend instead. I stared at the glowing screen for several seconds before locking the phone again without replying. 3 years ago, that message would have hurt me deeply. 2 years ago, I probably would have answered immediately with something forgiving just to keep peace between us. But tonight something inside me felt strangely still. Not healed. Not angry. Just tired in a way that reached deeper than disappointment. I looked back at Daniel's letter resting in my lap. Please do not spend the rest of your life shrinking yourself just to make other people comfortable. The words echoed quietly in my mind. For years, I had adjusted myself around Ryan and Melissa like furniture being slowly pushed toward the walls of a room. Nobody wanted crowded anymore. I accepted canceled holidays, last-minute excuses, forgotten phone calls. I told myself families changed with time. But maybe families only drift apart when one person keeps doing all the reaching. The next morning, I woke early to make pancakes for Noah before school. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving the streets damp and shining beneath pale autumn sunlight. Noah sat at the kitchen counter still wearing Daniel's oversized flannel shirt over his pajamas, his small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. "Grandma?" he asked quietly while I flipped pancakes on the stove. "Are you mad at Dad?" I paused for a moment before answering. Children always notice more than adults think they do. "No," I said honestly. "I think your father just forgot what matters sometimes." Noah lowered his eyes. "Mom says Grandpa spoiled you too much." A soft ache moved through my chest. Daniel used to say love only feels excessive to people who have forgotten how to give it. Before I could answer, headlights swept across the kitchen window. A black SUV pulled slowly into my driveway. Noah immediately stiffened on the stool beside me. Through the glass, I saw Melissa step out first wearing large sunglasses despite the cloudy morning. Ryan followed behind her with both hands shoved awkwardly into his coat pockets. Even from inside the house, I could already feel the tension standing between them. I turned the stove burner down and wiped my hands slowly on a dish towel while Melissa and Ryan walked toward the front porch. Noah climbed down from the stool beside me without saying a word. His shoulders had gone tight the moment he saw their car. That alone told me more than any explanation could have. Children do not brace themselves around people who make them feel safe. Melissa entered first after a quick knock that sounded more polite than sincere. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she carried the sharp scent of expensive perfume into the kitchen with her. Ryan followed a step behind looking exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes like he had not slept well in weeks. "There he is," Melissa said brightly when she spotted Noah. You scared us half to death this morning. Noah lowered his gaze immediately. I left a note. A note, Melissa repeated with a tight laugh. You are 8 years old, Noah. You do not disappear in the middle of the night with a note. Ryan finally looked at me then. Mom, why did you not call us? I stared at him. For a moment, surprised by the question. I assumed you knew where your son was. Silence settled heavily across the kitchen after that. Melissa crossed her arms. Well, obviously we did not. I could hear irritation creeping beneath her polished voice now. Ryan rubbed one hand over his face before speaking again. Noah said he wanted to spend time with you after school yesterday. We thought he was upset because we had dinner reservations. Dinner reservations. Such a clean phrase for something that had left me sitting alone beside a melting birthday cake. I nodded once and turned back toward the stove. Pancakes are almost ready. Melissa glanced around the kitchen, then toward the dining room where the untouched birthday decorations still remained. The silver balloons had already started sinking toward the floor overnight. One candle still sat burned down to the glass holder beside the cake stand. Her expression shifted briefly into something uncomfortable before disappearing again. We were going to celebrate this weekend, she said quickly. Ryan has been incredibly busy lately. I slid pancakes onto a plate without responding. The sound of the spatula against ceramic filled the silence instead. Ryan stared at the floor for several long seconds before finally speaking again in a quieter voice. Happy birthday, Mom. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. There was guilt in his face. Real guilt. But there was also distance, like somebody standing outside a locked house unsure how to get back inside. Noah suddenly walked over to me and slipped his small hand into mine. Melissa noticed immediately. Something cold flashed across her expression before she forced another smile. Noah, sweetheart, grab your backpack. We should get going. But Noah did not move. Instead, he looked up at Ryan carefully and asked the question none of us were ready for. Dad, why did Grandpa leave Grandma presents if birthdays were not important anymore? The entire kitchen went completely still. Ryan looked genuinely confused for a moment. What presents? He asked slowly. Noah glanced toward me before pointing at the living room. The silver box Grandpa kept in the garage. The color drained from Ryan's face almost instantly. Melissa answered too quickly. Oh, that old junk box. Her laugh sounded forced now. Daniel kept every random thing imaginable. But Ryan was no longer looking at her. His eyes had shifted past us toward the living room doorway where the silver box still rested on the coffee table beside Daniel's recliner. Something changed in his expression then. Recognition. Unease. Maybe even shame. He walked past me without another word and stopped beside the box. For several seconds he simply stared at it. I have not seen this since Dad got sick, he murmured quietly. Melissa stayed near the kitchen island with her arms crossed tightly. Ryan, we are already late. He ignored her completely. Slowly, he lifted the unopened envelope with his name written across the front. I watched his fingers tighten slightly against the paper the moment he recognized Daniel's handwriting. The room had become so quiet I could hear the ticking clock above the stove again. Noah stood beside me clutching the sleeve of my sweater. Ryan finally looked toward me. Where did this come from? Noah brought it last night, I answered calmly. He found it in the garage. Melissa exhaled sharply. I was cleaning out old storage bins, Ryan. Half that stuff was covered in dust. Ryan turned toward her then, confusion darkening across his face. You were throwing Dad's things away? Not throwing away, she corrected quickly. Organizing. We have talked about clearing space for months. Ryan looked back down at the envelope in his hands. His shoulders seemed heavier somehow, like he suddenly remembered something he had spent years trying not to think about. Dad told me once he was making recordings, he said quietly. After his diagnosis. My heart tightened. Daniel never mentioned recordings to me directly. Perhaps he worried I would not be able to handle hearing them after he was gone. Melissa's voice sharpened slightly. Ryan, this is not the time for some emotional scavenger hunt. Noah flinched beside me when she spoke. I felt it immediately. The small movement of fear in his body. Ryan noticed too. For the first time since arriving, he looked directly at his son instead of past him. "Did you ride your bike here alone?" Noah nodded slowly. "Because Grandma was by herself." Those 6 words landed harder than any accusation could have. Ryan lowered himself into Daniel's recliner and covered one hand over his mouth. He suddenly looked less like a 40-year-old businessman and more like the exhausted little boy who used to crawl into our bed after nightmares. Melissa checked her watch dramatically before forcing another smile toward me. Well, clearly emotions are running high today. But nobody answered her. Because for the first time in years, the silence inside my house no longer belonged to me alone. Ryan stayed in Daniel's recliner long after the pancakes had gone cold. Melissa paced near the kitchen doorway, checking her phone every few minutes, her patience thinning with each passing second. Noah sat quietly beside me at the table, coloring on the back of an old grocery receipt, while pretending not to listen to the adults. But children always listen, especially when families begin cracking open in front of them. Finally, Ryan turned the envelope over in his hands and carefully opened it. I watched his eyes move slowly across the page inside. At first his expression remained unreadable. Then his jaw tightened. A few seconds later, he stopped reading altogether and stared down at the paper as though something inside it had reached directly into his chest. "What is it?" Melissa asked quickly. Ryan did not answer her. He kept reading in silence until one quiet breath escaped him that sounded almost painful. Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his lap. "Dad knew," he said softly. Nobody moved. "Knew what?" Melissa pressed. Ryan finally looked up at her, and for the first time in years I saw something in my son that had nearly disappeared completely. Clarity. He knew Mom was being pushed aside. Melissa laughed once in disbelief. "Oh, come on, Ryan. Your father was emotional near the end. People say dramatic things when they are sick." Ryan shook his head slowly. "No. He was specific." My stomach tightened. Ryan glanced toward me before speaking again. "Dad wrote that he noticed holidays changing. He noticed Mom stopped getting invited to things unless she organized them herself." Melissa crossed her arms harder. "That is ridiculous." But Ryan continued quietly, almost as if reading the words directly from memory now. "He said a family does not fall apart all at once. It happens through small exclusions repeated over time." The room went still again. Even Noah stopped coloring. I looked down at my hands folded around my coffee mug, because hearing Daniel describe my loneliness so clearly somehow hurt more than living through it. Melissa's voice sharpened. "So now we are rewriting history because of one letter?" Ryan stood up slowly from the recliner. "Did you tell Noah birthdays for old people are depressing?" Melissa blinked. "Excuse me. Did you say it?" Her silence answered for her. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, leaves drifted slowly across the damp driveway beneath gray morning skies. "I forgot my mother's birthday," he whispered more to himself than anyone else. Again. The word again seemed to settle heavily inside him. Noah looked up carefully. "Grandpa never forgot." Ryan closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. I could see guilt moving across his face now in quiet waves, the kind that arrived too late to undo what caused them. Melissa grabbed her purse from the counter sharply. "This is unbelievable. We are really letting an 8-year-old and a dead man turn this into some kind of family trial." But Ryan did not follow her this time. He stayed standing beside the window staring out at the empty street while the silence around us finally forced him to hear what had been there all along. Melissa left 10 minutes later without another word to me. The front door closed harder than necessary behind her, and through the kitchen window I watched her sit alone inside the black SUV, gripping the steering wheel tightly while rainwater from the trees dripped across the windshield. Ryan remained inside the house. That surprised me more than anything else. Usually when tension appeared, he followed Melissa automatically like somebody responding to a silent signal. But this time he stayed, standing near the living room bookshelf with Daniel's letter still folded in his hand. Noah quietly carried his backpack toward the hallway. "I should get ready for school," he murmured. Ryan looked at his son carefully, then nodded once. "I will drive you today." Noah hesitated before disappearing down the hall. The moment he was gone, silence settled over the house again. Ryan walked slowly around the living room, his eyes lingering on things he probably had not truly noticed in years. Daniel's reading glasses still resting beside the recliner. The framed family photo from our trip to Yellowstone when Ryan was 12. The small crack above the fireplace mantel where we accidentally knocked over the Christmas tree one winter decades ago. "I used to love this house," he said quietly. I looked at him over the rim of my coffee mug. "You still can." Ryan gave a tired smile that vanished almost immediately. "Melissa says it is too old. Too much upkeep." I almost laughed at how familiar those words sounded. People always call things old right before they try replacing them. Ryan sat down heavily on the couch and rubbed both hands over his face again. "Mom," he began slowly, "have you ever felt like somebody changes you so gradually that you do not even realize it is happening?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Yes," I answered honestly. "But eventually you wake up and recognize yourself less and less." He stared down at Daniel's letter. Dad wrote that he worried I was becoming passive. He said avoiding conflict can slowly turn into avoiding responsibility. Outside, Melissa honked the SUV horn once. Sharp. Impatient. Ryan did not move. "She has been wanting us to move you into one of those retirement communities," he admitted quietly. The words did not shock me as much as they should have. Maybe because somewhere deep down I already knew. "She said this house would help pay for Noah's future college expenses if you sold it." I looked around the room slowly then. At the faded curtains I had sewn myself 20 years ago. At Daniel's recliner. At the old hardwood floors scratched by decades of living. People who only see money never understand what a home actually costs to build. Another honk echoed outside. Ryan flinched this time. Then his eyes drifted toward the silver box still resting on the coffee table. "Dad also wrote something else," he said softly. "He said if I ever reached the point where my son showed more kindness to you than I did, then I needed to stop and ask myself what kind of man I had become." Neither of us spoke after that. Because there are some truths that arrive too late to argue with. Ryan drove Noah to school that morning while I stayed behind cleaning the kitchen in silence. The birthday decorations came down slowly. I folded the blue star napkins Noah liked and placed them back inside the pantry drawer instead of throwing them away. The silver balloons had lost almost all their air by then, sagging toward the hardwood floor like tired memories. Usually after family disappointments, I rushed to smooth everything over. I would send cheerful texts, pretend nothing hurt, invite everyone back again as if love alone could repair neglect. But something felt different now. Maybe because Daniel's words had finally given shape to feelings I spent years trying to minimize. Or maybe because watching Noah defend me without hesitation forced me to confront how little the adults around me had done. Around noon, my neighbor Diane knocked softly on the back door carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Diane and I had lived across the street from each other for nearly 20 years. She was the kind of woman who noticed things without needing them explained. "I saw Melissa's car earlier," she said carefully while setting the dish on the counter. "Everything all right?" I almost answered automatically with yes. Old habits. But instead I surprised myself. "Not really." Diane studied my face quietly for a moment before nodding once like she already understood more than I had said. We sat together at the kitchen table drinking coffee while weak autumn sunlight filtered through the curtains. After a while she sighed softly and stirred cream into her mug. "I was not sure if I should mention this," she admitted. "But about 2 weeks ago I ran into Melissa at the pharmacy. Something in her tone made me look up immediately. She was asking the pharmacist about assisted living brochures," Diane continued carefully. "She said they were looking into places for you eventually. Somewhere smaller and easier to manage." My chest tightened, though not from surprise anymore. More from hearing the truth spoken aloud by someone else. Diane reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "I did not think it sounded like your idea." I stared out the kitchen window toward the maple tree in the front yard, where Daniel once hung a tire swing for Ryan. The rope marks were still faintly visible on the branch after all these years. "It was not," I answered quietly. Diane hesitated before speaking again. "Evelyn, sometimes people slowly start treating kind women like furniture. Useful, comfortable, easy to move around." I felt tears threaten again but held them back. Not because I was trying to be strong. I was simply tired of crying over people who kept choosing not to see me. Later that afternoon, Ryan called unexpectedly. His voice sounded rough. "Mom," he said after a long silence, "did Melissa ever talk to you directly about selling the house?" I looked toward Daniel's recliner across the living room, then at the silver box still resting on the coffee table beside it. "No," I answered calmly. She probably assumed she would not need to ask. 3 days later, Noah's elementary school held its annual Family Appreciation Assembly. Normally I would have stayed home. Large school events had become uncomfortable over the years because Melissa always managed to make me feel like an extra guest instead of family. But that Wednesday morning, Noah called before school and asked quietly, "Grandma, will you come this time?" So I went. The school gymnasium smelled faintly of floor polish, construction paper, and cafeteria pizza. Parents filled the folding chairs while teachers guided children into neat rows near the stage. I spotted Ryan and Melissa near the front almost immediately. Melissa wore a cream-colored sweater and carried one of those oversized coffee cups she always seemed to hold like an accessory. Ryan looked distracted again, thinner somehow than he had only a week earlier. When Noah noticed me entering the gym, his entire face brightened. He waved both arms enthusiastically until his teacher gently lowered them with a smile. That simple reaction warmed something inside me more than I expected. Melissa noticed too. Her expression tightened almost invisibly before she turned back toward the stage. The assembly began with songs and student awards. Little voices echoed across the gym while parents recorded videos on their phones. Then Noah's teacher stepped onto the stage holding a stack of papers. "This month," she announced warmly, "our third graders wrote essays about their personal heroes." Children immediately began whispering excitedly around the room. "One essay in particular touched all of us deeply," the teacher continued. "I asked permission to share part of it today." Ryan straightened slightly beside Melissa. I assumed he thought she meant Noah's essay about him. Parents usually expect that. But then the teacher smiled toward Noah standing near the stage curtain. "This essay is called My Hero is My Grandma." The entire gym grew quiet. I saw Melissa freeze beside Ryan. Noah walked nervously onto the stage, clutching his folded paper with both hands. His little sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor. "My grandma's name is Evelyn," he began carefully into the microphone. "She makes pancakes shaped like dinosaurs even when she is sad." A few parents laughed softly. Noah continued reading with complete sincerity. "My grandma remembers everybody's birthdays even if people forget hers. She keeps old pictures because she says memories matter." My throat tightened instantly. Ryan stared straight ahead now without blinking. Noah's small voice trembled slightly as he read the final lines. "Sometimes grown-ups stop being kind when life gets busy. But my grandma still loves people anyway. Grandpa told me before he died that grandma was the heart of our family." I think he was right. Silence filled the gym after he finished. Not awkward silence. Emotional silence. The kind that settles over a room when truth arrives unexpectedly. I looked toward Ryan then. Tears stood openly in his eyes for the first time since Daniel's funeral. Beside him, Melissa sat completely motionless, staring down at her untouched coffee cup, while the sound of applause slowly filled the room around us. Winter arrived early that year. By the first week of December, thin sheets of ice covered the edges of the lake outside the small cabin I had rented 30 miles north of town. It was not a large place. Just a quiet one-bedroom cabin with a stone fireplace, creaking wooden floors, and windows that overlooked the water. For the first time in years, the silence around me no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I still kept Daniel's silver box on the bookshelf beside my chair. Some evenings I listened to the cassette tape while snow drifted softly outside. His voice filled the room the way warmth fills cold hands, slowly and gently. Ryan started visiting every Sunday after Noah's school assembly. At first he seemed unsure how to speak to me again. Guilt does that to people. It makes simple conversations feel heavier than they should. But over time things became easier. Not perfect. Some damage inside families never fully disappears. But honesty finally entered places where silence used to live. Melissa never apologized directly. Instead, she became quieter, less controlling around Ryan, less dismissive toward me. Sometimes people change because they suddenly grow kinder. Other times they change because truth finally leaves them nowhere left to hide. One snowy afternoon in late December, Ryan stood beside me on the cabin porch watching Noah throw handfuls of snow toward the frozen lake. I almost lost you, he admitted quietly. I looked out across the water where pale winter sunlight reflected against the ice. No, I answered softly. You almost lost yourself. He lowered his eyes after that because deep down he knew it was true. Before leaving that evening, Noah handed me a small wrapped package covered in crooked tape and far too much ribbon. You have to open it after we leave, he whispered seriously. I smiled and promised I would. After their car disappeared down the snowy road, I carried the little gift inside and sat beside the fireplace. The cabin glowed softly beneath strands of Christmas lights I had hung around the windows myself. Outside, snow continued falling in quiet, steady flakes. Inside the box was a framed photograph Noah had taken at the school assembly. In the picture, I was standing near the stage looking up at him while he read his essay. My eyes were full of tears, but I was smiling too. On the back of the frame, Noah had written carefully in crooked handwriting, "Grandpa said you are the heart of our family. Hearts should never eat birthday cake alone." I sat there for a long time holding the frame against my chest while the fire crackled softly nearby. For years I believed growing older meant becoming less visible, easier to forget, easier to move aside. But I understand something different now. The people who truly love you will always notice when you are hurting, even if they are only 8 years old. And sometimes the smallest person in the family becomes the one brave enough to remind everyone else what love is supposed to look like.